Good evening, everyone. I want to thank you so much for taking the time this evening to tune into our SPHE webinar, which is looking at effective reporting on SPHE within wellbeing. So due to our current circumstances, this webinar is being broadcast from my home. So I would like to take an opportunity to apologise in advance for any household noises or technical issues we may experience this evening. We do have backup plans in place, but hopefully they will not be necessary. So thank you so much for joining us. My name is Ciara Byrne and I work with JCT as team leader for SPHE, and I'm looking forward to taking you through this SPHE webinar tonight. There's going to be a number of interactive polls and questions during the course of the next hour, and I look forward to hearing all of your responses. You will have the opportunity to play back this webinar at a later stage by yourself or with your colleagues, as it will be uploaded to our website, www.jct.ie, and it will be there under the Wellbeing section. And alongside this, you'll be able to find all the other SPHE related materials, including the key documents and slides and support materials relating to CPD workshops that have been offered to SPHE teachers to date. I would always encourage people to follow JC for Teachers on Twitter for up-to-date information. And as always, if you have any questions or queries at all, please don't hesitate to send them in to info@jct.ie, and we'll endeavour to get an answer to you as quickly as is possible. So if you have not attended a webinar before, this is what your screen would have looked like when you logged in, and there is a tab in the right-hand corner, and this is how you will access the toolbar, and it's where you can find access to the handouts and the questions facility that you can use throughout the webinar. One of those facilities, as I said, is the questions bar. You can ask questions throughout the webinar, and there's myself and other people in the background who will address these questions for you. And if they're not answered this evening, you will receive an email with an answer in the coming days. So throughout tonight's webinar, I'm going to be using a Padlet as the main way to interact with you and get some feedback on different activities and to hear your views. If you like to open this link, you can click on the handout on the right-hand side, so the webinar handout, which has an interactive link on it in the taskbar. Or you can take this HTML code now and put it into a separate window. I would also possibly suggest if you have a phone or other device available to you, you might open the Padlet on this other device so that you can see the webinar and the Padlet at the same time. This is not necessary to engage with it, but it might be more helpful or easier later on to navigate with. So I'll leave that code there just for a couple of seconds to give you a chance to get it open. Okay, I will repeat that code later on when we are opening up some of the different activities. So if you missed it at this point, it is in the handout and it will be repeated later on. So throughout this webinar, I'm going to be making reference to some of the following documents. So the Framework for Junior Cycle 2015, the NCCA Wellbeing Guidelines, the Reporting Guidelines, the SPHE Short Course Specification, and where SPHE can feature on the JCPA. So I want to get a chance to see who's in our audience tonight. I'm going to conduct a poll, and this is to provide an opportunity for myself and JCT SPHE to gather a little bit of insight into who's tuned in tonight, but also what SPHE looks like in schools across the country, which is really helpful for us in designing appropriate supports for you. So I'm looking to ask you how many hours SPHE has timetabled in your school. So in case you're unsure, if you have a 40-minute class, then 70 hours is one SPHE class a week over 3 years, and this is your minimum requirement. If you have 2 periods in first year, but only 1 in second and third year, you're looking at around 88 hours, so you would fall into that second option there. And if you have 2 periods a week in 1 or more year groups, so for example, if you had first and second year, you had 2 classes and only 1 in third year, you're looking at 110 hours, so you fall into that third category. And if you have hour-long classes, then 1 class a week is in that 100-hour category. So don't worry if you're unsure. This is just an opportunity, as I said, to gather a little bit of information for ourselves in designing supports. So what I'm going to do is I am going to open that poll now, and if you could let me know how many hours your school timetables for SPHE. So that poll should come up on your screen if you just click on the answer that is most suitable for your school. So I'm just going to give another 2-3 seconds there and I'll close that poll. Thank you so much for putting in your responses. Okay, I'm going to close that there. It looks like around 45% of schools are still falling into that 70-hour bracket. And then it's a 20% split, 22% split between the other two categories. Okay, the next question I'm going to ask you is what curricular option your school is offering in terms of SPHE. So the most recent DES circular laid out 4 options for SPHE at junior cycle. So the SPHE short course, designed for 100 hours and learning outcome based, a school designed short course using the NCCA template, also 100 hours engagement, a school design program made up of modules and units for SPHE that are planned and recorded using the Appendix I from the Wellbeing Guidelines, or the syllabus from 2000 for SPHE based on 10 modules and designed for 70 hours. So again, I'm just going to open that poll and ask you to put in which option best suits your school. So that poll should be showing up on your screen. And again, if you just select the option that best suits you, if you're unsure, that's okay. Again, this is just to gather a little bit of information for ourselves in designing supports. Okay, just another second or two there on that, and I'll close that poll. Okay, I'm going to close that there. Again, it's around 40% of people following the syllabus from 2000 and around 22-23% of schools following that NCCA designed short course from 2016. So thank you so much for engaging with those. So thank you so much for engaging with those. As I said, it makes designing supports for schools a little easier for us if we know what we're looking at on the ground. So if we're looking at what we're hoping to accomplish this evening, this webinar is looking at considering how learning is captured and reported on in SPHE, recognizing the connection between teaching, learning, assessment and reporting in SPHE, and exploring a range of reporting practices in SPHE. So with that, let's get started. And the first part of this webinar is looking at what is ongoing reporting. So Rita Berry tells us that reporting is a form of communication that happens between students, parents, teachers, school community, and other stakeholders. And we've underlined students here because often when we think of reporting, we fall into that category of parent-teacher meetings, of report cards that are sent home, and sometimes we tend to overlook a lot of the interactions we have with students on a day-to-day basis that are very much a form of reporting. And I think this is especially true of SPHE when there's a large amount of informal in-class reporting happening every day with examples, discussions, feedback, debates, really good questioning and reflection. So these are all considered forms of reporting because it's all around the student's development and the student's learning. And a sentiment is strongly echoed in the framework document as well. The emphasis for reporting is really placed on the student and making sure that they are actively involved in the process alongside their parents and guardians because it is their progress and their work that is being discussed. So in 2018, the NCCA published the reporting guidelines, and within that document, there are 8 guiding principles of reporting. So they are encouraging authentic engagement with parents, providing opportunities for students through feedback to reflect, valuing the professional judgment of teachers, using the language of learning, be manageable, clearly communicating students' learning, provide information on a broad range of achievement, and taking an inclusive approach. So these principles are not designed to be standalone. They are all connected to each other. So for example, if we took the language of learning, this is the language we use when communicating student learning. It's the language we use when we engage with parents. It is also the language that's used to support students reflecting on feedback and reflecting on their learning. So they're also not designed to be prescriptive. They're there to be adapted to your school's needs and context. And for the purpose of this evening, we're going to be using them as a lens to look at some samples of reporting in SPHE as we move through the webinar. So it's important to remember that reporting can take many different formats. So reporting in junior cycle can be informal oral feedback, it could be parent-teacher meetings, it could be learning logs and diaries, which is especially relevant to SPHE, as well as formal end of term or end of topic written reports. So you might use one, if not all of these reporting forms with your SPHE classes at the moment, depending on your school context. But it is essential that reporting, no matter what form it takes, is seen as part of the assessment process and is grounded in student work and development. So with that in mind, when we think about that assessment process and where reporting fits in, what we're thinking about is that need to consider how students will show evidence of their learning and how they are showing us that they have learned something and how we're reporting on it. So with that in mind, my first question for the Padlet is, how are we currently gathering evidence of student learning? So what current practices or methods are you using with your SPHE students to gather evidence of student learning in the classroom? So the Padlet code is there at the bottom. It is also in your handout. So I'm just going to give you 1 minute to maybe put something into the Padlet, and then I'm going to open it up here on the screen and we're going to have a look at some of the stuff coming through. So I'm just going to open up the Padlet here. So the Padlet should be showing there on your screen now. So you can see there, we've got self-reflection portfolios, folders of worksheets or exercise books, making posters, learning logs, a Wellbeing copybook or folder or Google Classroom. You're gonna have to scroll down here, there's loads coming in. Self-reflection, informal observation, project work or surveying students, questioning, oral feedback, workbooks. So there's a lot of pieces here coming in around self-reflection or using sort of collection of reflections and projects, learning logs, which again would link to reflection. So we can kind of see, even in SPHE, we have that space of that informal reporting. It's still a form of reporting though, that piece around reflection, and we're gathering that evidence as we go along. So lots of stuff still coming in there, project work, workbooks, student voice, that's clear evidence of learning. Okay. I'm going to go back across to the piece. Thank you so much for adding those in. You can continue to add stuff into this, by the way. This Padlet will remain open after the webinar closes. So if you're planning at any other point and you want to come back to it and have a look and get some ideas from it, please do. Please do. I'm going to head back to the other screen. So thank you for all of those suggestions. I'm going to look at a sample plan for a unit of learning, and we use the planning template here. It's not a requirement to use this template, but it is there in the handout section if you would like to use it for your own planning. It might just provide something for structure, but you might decide to adapt it or to use your own templates, and that's okay as well. So The learning outcomes, myself and SPHE advisor Nari Louise Ross, we worked with these learning outcomes 1.5, 1.7, 2.1 and 2.2 that you can see there on your screen. And we designed this unit of learning for a second year group in term 3, and we had the focus of healthy living. So with these learning outcomes in mind, we were thinking about our group, we decided on this key learning. So the key learning is what we want them to know and understand or be able to do by the end of our 4 or 5 week module. And you might come up with something different, or you might interpret these learning outcomes differently for your class or your school, and that's perfectly fine, and the whole point of the learning outcomes. But for the purpose of this exercise, myself and Nari would like our students to find websites, books, or other sources of reliable information to be able to critically evaluate some advertisements around health or diet, evaluate sample food or sleep diaries, investigate the benefits of good sleep hygiene, explore the links between sleep or sleep deprivation and food choices, and explore SMART goals and how to implement them, and establish and set themselves a SMART health goal. And that could be something like drinking more water, hitting that 10,000 steps a day, or eating 5 fruit and veg a day, or getting 8 hours sleep. So with that key learning and those learning outcomes in mind, and bearing in mind the answers you gave to the last question on the Padlet, I'd like to ask you, how would you assess or gather evidence of this learning if you were to teach this module or this unit to your class? So are there any of the suggestions there that might be suitable? And again, I'm going to ask you to answer this in the Padlet. And what you'll see in the Padlet when you open up is that key learning box is there at the top of the column. So you'll be able to see that key learning when you're thinking about how you would gather evidence of it. So again, I'm just going to give you 1 or 2 seconds there to maybe open it up and get your ideas in, and then I'm going to open it up and have a look. So I can already see answers coming through there. I'm just going to open the Padlet now. Okay, so getting students to design a meal, an oral presentation task, a physical activity diary, a nutrition diary, a food and exercise poster, a poster presentation, or to create a video, create a food sleep blog, food samples and evaluated them, fitness trackers, project work, or a health diary, to gather different sources. So just go out and look for sources. A leaflet, so design a leaflet for the school or for themselves, maybe a food plate diary. So lots of stuff coming through there. Group work, poster presentations to class, nutrition, lifestyle, a shopping bag. So go through a shopping bag and what's in it. Oh, it's still being added to. So food plate. There's lots of really good ideas coming through. Again, this is nice that we have this Padlet so that you can revisit it later if this is something you want to actually do with your class, or if you're planning at a later stage, you might want to come back here and see if there's anything that you can draw on. A presentation for another year group. So design a presentation and then give it to another year group. Okay, so there's loads of options coming through there, and it's all gathering evidence that's related to that piece around that key learning at the top. So I'm going to come back out of here and go into our presentation again. Experience a slight technical issue there, but we should be coming back on now. Apologies. Yeah, the screen should be back there. The main thing that we can see through this is that assessment and reporting, it can't be planned for retrospectively. So we can have informal assessments like class discussions or observations, walking debates in class and in the SPHE classroom, and they're an integral part of that classroom. But we must be planning for these assessments and making sure that they align with the learning and the learning outcomes, if that is what we are planning from. So you can see from that sample that we just looked at The key learning that was designed was linked to those learning outcomes, and the assessments that you came up with were clearly linked to that key learning. So there is a clear alignment among all of the elements in that plan. So we're going to look through some samples of reporting. And these practices from schools using the guiding principles of reporting we looked at earlier. And some of these practices might mirror your own or something that's happening in your school, or there might be practices here that would work well in your school and you might want to consider, or there might be something that you do similarly that you might want to build on. So you will see here that I have the 8 principles here, and the 8 principles again are repeated within the Padlet itself. So I'm going to read through the samples for you and I'll remind you pieces, and then I'll open the Padlet and we'll have a look and see. So I'm just going to ask you to see and to think about, when we're going through these examples, which of these 8 principles do you think is strongest or is most evident in that sample? So we have School A, and School A uses a school-developed SPHE reflection diary to allow students to make their learning visible and to have a student-led record of their achievements. We have always created a number of different student templates to support reflection within the class, but also to help students to reflect after class. The booklet stays with them for 3 years, and parents are asked to view and sign aspects of the booklet over the course of 3 years. And students use it as a means of reporting and feedback on the learning that has happened in class. And this has become a very manageable and meaningful way to report to parents. So with that sample in mind and on the Padlet, which of the 8 principles of reporting do you feel is most evident in this sample? So I'll leave the sample open for a minute and I'll read through some of the key points. So while you're looking at the Padlet, so they use a school-designed reflection diary. It's a student-led record. They create templates for in-class and out-of-class reflection. The booklet stays with them for 3 years and parents have access to it and are asked to sign parts of it. And they use it as feedback on learning that has happened in class to students. So with that in mind, which of those 8 key principles do you think is most evident in that piece? So I'm going to have a look and see what you're thinking in the webinar, in the Padlet is. So there's a couple answers coming up there. So manageable, clearly communicates student learning, opportunities for reflection, parental engagement, clearly communicates. So there's a strong emphasis on that communication and the engagement with parents there. So if we come back in here, when we looked at this for ourselves, we felt that encouraging authentic engagement with parents, providing opportunities to reflect, and clearly being manageable were the key ones for us. But again, I can see that clearly communicating student learning because they're so involved with it. I can see using the language of learning, and this comes back to what I mentioned earlier about these all being interconnected. If you're using one, sometimes you're using more than one. So I can definitely see where those other ones are coming in. Okay, School B. School B is just establishing a more defined SPHE program in their school. Up to now, the most common form of reporting to parents was based on attendance in class recorded every week and student behaviour recorded on some weeks. The main mode of assessment is through informal class discussion. Written reports in SPHE are sent home on 2 occasions per year. And in addition to written reports, SPHE teachers attend all parent-teacher meetings. The same question again, which of the principles do you see most strongly in sample B? So I'll keep the sample open for a moment. And again, while you're just writing in the Padlet, I'll remind you some of the key elements. So it's reporting based on attendance and behaviour in 2 formal reports home a year and informal assessment class discussion. And they also attend the parent-teacher meetings. So the parent-teacher meetings and 2 formal reports home a year. So which of those eight principles do you think is most suitable to this? So I'm not going to switch across to the Padlet, but I do have it open here in front of me. But I'm seeing it come through here, being manageable, valuing professional judgment of teachers, providing opportunities for students to reflect, valuing professional judgment of teachers, authentic engagement with parents, parental involvement. Parents are involved. It's manageable. Again, valuing professional judgment of teachers. That one's coming through quite strongly in the Padlet. I can see that coming up. Student learning. Manageable inclusion of parents. So there's a strong element there coming through on that Padlet around that value the professional judgments of teachers and being manageable. When myself and Nari went through this earlier, the two that we identified were being manageable and using the language of learning, but I can see the parental involvement through the parent-teacher meetings and through the formal reports being sent home twice a year, and also that valuing professional judgment of teachers, because both of these reports are coming from the teacher who is evaluating the student and who is there and best placed to make that judgment. So there's definitely a link between all of them. Okay, School C, which is our last school. The parent-teacher meeting is a primary source of reporting in SPHE in our school. The student attends with their parents. 5 years ago, parents did not really visit the SPHE teacher. However, as a department, we wanted to increase this engagement, but also show the learning that takes place. In this week ahead of the conversation, the student answers key questions about their learning in SPHE, and during the meeting, the student reports on their learning and the teacher provides brief specific feedback on the student work. Okay, so again, in the Padlet, I just want you to think, which of these principles of reporting can you see most evidently in this example? So the parent-teacher meeting is the focus of this school sample, and the student attends the parent-teacher meeting with them, but they must prepare answers about their learning in SPHE the week before, and it's the student who gives the report and the teacher gives feedback on this. So which of the samples do you think? So I'm watching the Padlet here. Encouraging authentic engagement with parents. Authentic engagement with parents, opportunity for students to reflect is coming through strongly. Clearly communicate student learning is also coming through quite strongly. Providing opportunities to reflect, professional judgment of teachers, communication, student reflection, taking an inclusive approach. Okay, that's one that's coming through there as well. That's come up 2 or 3 times. So all students are involved in this, and every stakeholder is involved in this process. So everyone is an inclusive model. Authentic engagement. So really strong leaning towards that student reflection and the authentic engagement with parents coming through in the Padlet review of that. Again, when we looked at it earlier, we saw encouraging authentic engagement with parents, and we saw providing opportunities for students through feedback to reflect, and we saw that communicating student learning piece as well. So we can kind of see that there is a link between all of those, and we're looking at them there. So thank you so much for answering those 3 questions and for looking at those samples. I'm going to bring you back to the sample that we looked at. Okay, so consider the sample plan that we looked at earlier. You filled in some of the suggestions on the Padlet. So we took some of those suggestions. So if these were some of the assessments and these were some of the things that came up in the Padlet, so creating a food or sleep record, a reflection diary, walking debates, a project of some sort, exit cards, creating their own advertisements or creating posters, and then maybe a class discussion around different aspects. So these were all things that we considered to be gathering evidence of learning and gathering evidence of that key learning from those summative and formative assessment moments. I want you to consider and keeping in mind those samples, how will you report on this learning? So if we gather all this evidence, how are we going to report at the end of this? And this may depend on your school or your school context and what reporting forms are available to you. So that is the final question in that Padlet, if you want to have a look at it. And it's even got a space there with the assessment piece in it. So it's there for you to look at. And I'll give you a minute or two, and then I'm going to open it up so we can have a look at it and have a discussion around it. So if you've gathered this evidence, either informally or formally, how will we report on this? And again, this will depend on your school and the reporting processes and practices that are available there. So I'm going to open up the Padlet. I'm going to have to scroll across now because it's starting to fill up. Okay, so let's have a look here. So school reports display on parent-teacher night. Okay, learning logs, reflection, feedback sheets, online forms, learning logs and reflection sheets, school reports, learning logs, display board, parent-teacher meeting, student discussion forum either in class or among schools, oral feedback to students, school report, parent-teacher meetings, group work on PowerPoint presentations, display on school website, verbal feedback, peer feedback, feedback from teacher to student linked to success criteria. Okay, reflection sheets, student discussion presentations, parent-teacher meetings, the use of language of learning, the JCPA, if this is a part of your CBA process, if that project is part of the CBA, or possibly in the other areas of learning or other areas of wellbeing, which we're going to look at later. Reflective journal, school report. So there's lots of different ways you can see there of reporting on this learning. And the different evidence will elicit a different type of report based on what suits your school or what suits your students. So there's lots of different things. There's one here, currently we don't have an avenue for reporting. And that's interesting. So you might not have an avenue for formal reporting, so like a written school report, but there's definitely avenues for informal reporting with students through feedback or through learning logs and reflection diaries, like some of the other suggestions that have come through there. So that's all feedback to the student. And because we're reporting to them, that is a form of reporting. So there's always some kind of avenue, but it might not be an official avenue. I see what you mean there through that process. Okay, thank you so much for that. The most important piece here is what you can see though, is that clear link. If I come back out of this and go back into our screen. When we look at this plan now, what we have is something that aligns clearly through all of the pieces. So we have our learning outcomes, which our key learning is connected to. Our assessment is drawn from that key learning, and our reporting is then based on that evidence gathering and that assessment. So we have a piece that is clearly aligned through the whole plan. And that goes back to that piece we were looking at from the reporting guidelines, that planning for assessment and reporting must happen concurrently with planning for teaching and learning. Because if we want them all to line up together, we have to think of them as one process, and they do all flow from each other, but we can't go back at the end and figure out where to put them. Okay, so thank you so much for putting your answers in there. I'm going to give you a moment here to consider the principles and the samples we have looked at and the sample that you have created, and just think about your own school and your own school context and the processes and practices that are in place there. And I want you to think, are there any of the school samples that you could adapt to your school context? Or is there any of the principles of reporting that you or your school could develop further? There might be one that you do really, really well in, like you might be excellent, or your school might have excellent processes in place for engaging with parents or encouraging authentic engagement with parents. So maybe there's something there that you can build on or that you could share with other schools. If you feel comfortable, you can share your reflection on this in the Padlet or in the chat bar or in the questions facility, but this is mostly just a moment for you to reflect. And in the handout, there is a box with these two questions in it as well, where you can jot down your reflection or your thoughts. And if you just capture those thoughts, and maybe at a later stage when you're thinking about reporting or you're thinking about those processes, this might be a good starting point for you for further developments. So just to capture that so that you have a reminder for it for later time. Okay, also helpful to this. So if you're looking to build on any of this practice, one or two of the NCCA toolkits that might be useful for when working on reporting is Students Reflecting on Their Learning, or the Formative Feedback booklet. They're available in the handout as a link. So if you click the link in your handout, it will bring you to that website. And they're available there for you as a support for teachers. The NCCA has developed a number of quality resources to assist teachers in their practice relating to formative assessment. Each of these is a workbook and a PowerPoint that goes with it with activities that you can work through yourself. So they may be helpful if you're looking at any of these practices and you want to work on them. Okay, so the next part of this webinar is going to look at exploring SPHE within the JCPA. And the landscape for reporting has changed dramatically over the last number of years, but particularly for SPHE. Reporting has undergone a number of changes since the introduction of junior cycle, and we're just going to explore that changing landscape in a little more detail. So we looked at these curricular options at the very start when I asked you to put into the poll which option for study your school is currently following. And the curricular option your school is following will have an impact on how you report. So whether you're following the short course in SPHE, the school design short course using the NCCA template, a school design program made up of modules or units planned using the Appendix I, or if you're following the junior certificate syllabus from 2000 based around those 10 modules. But the one thing that we need to keep in mind is no matter which curricular option we are following, consideration needs to be given to how the students will show evidence of their learning, both through ongoing and summative assessment activities. So it doesn't matter which option we're following, we still need to be planning along those lines of teaching, learning, assessment, and reporting. So reporting on SPHE is part of the Wellbeing programme. So since 2017, SPHE has formed part of the Wellbeing programme. And from 2020, the Junior Cycle Profile of Achievement, or the JCPA, will be designed to allow for learning within wellbeing to be reported upon for the very first time. So up until this point, if you're not familiar, if you haven't seen a JCPA, you've had space to report on the state certified examinations, the classroom-based assessments, the other areas of learning, and the Level 2 Learning Programme L2 LPs. This is what it was looked like up until 2019. But for our current third years, who will get their JCPA in the next academic year, the JCPA will include all of those items and space to report on achievements in the area of well-being, which you can see on the right. Okay, so below that classroom-based assessments short courses, you've got well-being and other areas of well-being. So we're going to have a look at these two spaces now and what they entail. So if we take the first box, the 2020 JCPA will have listed as a default the 3 well-being related short courses. So CSPE, SPHE and PE. You can see them on the right in that new section called Wellbeing and the 3 short courses listed below. The student who has studied the short course in SPHE and undertaken the CBA will have a descriptor awarded on the JCPA by their school. So as follows with all other CBAs, there'll be a SLAR and they'll be awarded a descriptor, exceptional, above expectations, in line with expectations, yet to meet expectations. And you can see that there, the awarding in the box there. If a student has not studied the short course in SPHE, they will have the following descriptor entered on their JCPA by their school, not reported. So if there's no CBA there, there's been nothing to bring to a SLAR, there is nothing to report on. So we can't award a descriptor to work that has not been completed because they were not following that course. So not reported is the default in that box. So this this reporting will be in line with students who are in third year who have followed curricular option 1 or 2. So if they followed the short course in SPHE developed by the NCCA, or if your third years have followed a short course in SPHE that has been designed by the school in line with the NCCA template and guidelines, then this is where they will be reported on in the JCPA. The 2020 JCPA will also have a free text box entitled Other Areas of Wellbeing. And if a student did not study the Wellbeing short courses, their learning in the area of PE, CSP and SPHE may be recorded here also. So this is where your students will be reported on and their learning will be reported on if they have not completed one of those short courses. So that's curricular option 3 and 4 and where you'll report on there. So schools have a really good opportunity here to decide how best to gather this information and how to collate it on the JCPA. And there's huge potential here to involve the students in this process and tap into them and the skills that they've developed around reflection and discussing and understanding their own learning. So if we take this example here, and I know this one is for the other areas of learning, so this would have appeared on the 2019 JCPA. And this school, Dunshaughlin Community College, have created a space on their website, if you see there in the left, where students can click into JCPA Other Learning Experiences and it will open a Microsoft form. And students then have the opportunity when they've engaged in something that they think is really good learning that's not happening in their class, maybe it's something different, that they can write themselves up a piece and it will be stored. And what they end up having is a bank of student-led and student-created statements that can be then used for the generation of the JCPA. So Mary played an active role in her SPHE project, sharing survey findings with an audience. This helped Mary to improve her presentation skills. So students have a note there that they must write it in the third person for placement on the JCPA, but it means that you have the student at the center of this process. They know most what they're experiencing and what they're engaging with on their day-to-day in school. So they're creating these statements for themselves. And the inclusion of these student-developed statements within the other areas of wellbeing can really help students become much more aware of themselves. It actively includes that element of student voice and engages that reflection on learning, and it puts the student at the center of the reporting about themselves. So if a student did not study a wellbeing short course, their learning in SPHE may be recorded here. But it's up to your school to find out how they're going to collate that data and how they're going to present it on the JCPA. I'm going to bring you through school D here. So we have another school, and this was a school that tapped into that other areas of learning piece for SPHE, but it's a good practice that they might be able to carry across to the new other areas of wellbeing space. So in this school, they saw potential for SPHE in the newly designed JCPA, especially regards other areas of learning. As part of their final summative report, along with other teachers, including CSP and PE, they explored how they could support students in developing their statements with the support of the language of the key skills and the wellbeing indicators. So currently we have several SPHE related statements that students can choose as their final statements. Some students choose one of these to be included as one of their listed other areas of learning on the JCPA, and we're looking to expand this process across first and second year in the coming years. So again, kind of like Dunshaughlin Community College, this school is working on student-led statements relating to wellbeing that students are putting together themselves to be placed on that JCPA form at the end. And they're drawing heavily on supports that already exist in the system. They're drawing on the key skills and they're drawing on the indicators of well-being. So there's a language and there's a support there that students can draw on for themselves when creating these statements. They don't have to 100% reinvent the wheel with this. There is supports there that they can use that ensures that there's a standard across them. And again, I'm just going to ask you to stop and pause for a moment. And again, there's a space on your handout for you to think about this. Is there anything in either sample D or in the Dunshaughlin Community College website that you could take from their practice and apply to your own school context? So is there something there that they're doing that you think would work well for you? And if so, you might want to make note of it so that again, when you return to this idea around reporting, or when you're thinking about the JCPA in the future, you might come back to this and pick it up and take out those notes again. And this brings us back to that point around the approach to reporting benefiting students by charting the progress they are making and actively involving them and their parents and guardians in reflection on and discussion of learning progress. So that whole thing around if students are cultivating and are reflecting on their learning and creating their own statements for the JCPA, they're actively involved in this process and they're actively involved in the reflection and discussion on their learning. And it values teacher judgment and links back clearly to the teaching and learning and formative feedback in classrooms. So they can only make those reflections if you, the teacher, have had these conversations with them and they understand how to recognize it for themselves. Okay, throughout this, you've been answering questions in the questions box, or you've been putting questions in. There's one or two questions here that I have that we anticipated. We're going to go through the answers. And then what's going to happen is I'll stay online afterwards and we'll continue answering questions in that question box. So please, if you do have questions, please put them in. So where can I access those reporting guidelines and the guidelines for the classroom-based assessment in SPHE? The ncca.ie website or the curriculumonline.ie is where you'll find all of those documents. But the documents are also available. There's a link in your webinar handout. So you'll find a link to all of those documents in there. So just click the hyperlink and you'll be brought to them and you can save them for future reference. We are currently undertaking CBA as part of the short course with our current second years, but not our current third years. We phased it in over time. Does this mean our school enters not reported as the descriptor on the JCPA? So your current second years are doing the CBA, but your current third years might be following the syllabus because you've phased in the short course over time. In this case, your current third years did not undertake a short course and they did not take its associated CBA, so you will enter not reported. So you have opportunities to report in other sections of the JCPA, other areas of wellbeing. You can definitely write something around SPHE in this space, but as they did not undertake a CBA, it's not reported that will be entered under that piece. Okay. I'd like to thank you for tuning in this evening. So we've gone through considering how learning is captured and reported on in SPHE. We've recognised the connection between teaching, learning, assessment, reporting in SPHE, and we've explored a range of reporting practices in SPHE as well. I'm going to stay on the line and answer some more questions in the questions bar. Thank you so much for joining us. And again, a reminder that these supports are always available for you. Our website, www.jct.ie, where you'll find the recording of tonight's webinar, along with all of our other CPD supports. At JC for Teachers on Twitter for up-to-date information, and info@jct.ie for any queries you might have in the future. So thank you so much for joining us this evening, And again, any questions that you have, please don't hesitate to put them into the bar.
Tom, I'm working here, so hello, anyone there?